Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tatro here with BandLab, and I'm here to teach you the basics of making music in BandLab. We've already covered the fundamentals of rhythm and making drums in BandLab in our previous episode, and today we're going to be talking all about chords. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Put it all together. We're going to dive in straight away here into BandLab Web to find the easiest way to make chords in BandLab, but then later we're going to jump back into BandLab Mobile and we're going to dip our toe into the waters of some music theory to show you how to build your own chords. But for now, let's start with BandLab Web. And let's open up Studio. From here, we're going to select instruments. You can select whatever kind of instrument you want, but I am going to keep it on the piano sound. So I'm just going to use my mouse to click these notes here. I also have in front of me a MIDI keyboard, which allows me to play notes too. So if you have one, you can follow along that way. But also with the little musical typing button here, making sure that that is enabled, I can use any QWERTY keyboard to play notes as well. So pick whichever way is easier for you to follow along in this tutorial. We're starting right now with the simplest way to make chords and chord progressions, meaning you need very little theory knowledge in order to dive in right now. So what we're going to do first and foremost is look down at our instrument and these settings here, the mode. Let's switch into Smart Keys, which is going to give us only notes that are in the key of our song. What does the key of our song mean? We're going to dive into this later, but essentially it's a rule. It says you may only use these 7 notes in this song. And I'll explain that more as we dive deeper. The specific key that we're in is going to be a letter name. So you can pick whatever letter name you want, but if you want to follow along with me, let's just stick to C. And then we are going to specifically select a key or a scale. We'll select major for now, but let's take note of these being here for later. So now our keyboard is changed. On screen, we only see the notes of C major, and on our QWERTY keyboards, same thing. If you play on your MIDI keyboard, just stay on the white keys for now. Okay, but this is about chords, not just about these single notes. So what do? Well, let's go ahead and turn on Smart Chords. We'll let BandLab do the thinking for us. So now, pressing a single key results in a full chord. Chord is multiple notes coming together to make a harmony, and specifically you really need 3 notes to make a chord, but they can have more, and there are some exceptions to that rule in the context of music, but ignore those for now. We need 3 notes basically to make a single chord. So if I go ahead and play this chord right now, we're going to see actually 4 notes illuminated here, but the first note is C3. The last note is C4, so I'm not counting C4 as another note. C and C are the same thing, whether we go all the way up the keyboard, C is a C. They're just different octaves, right? They're either higher or lower. They're not unique notes, other than their octave. For this demo, I'm going to turn Smart Chords off, are C, E, and G. Then we got that C on top, don't forget. But those 3 notes come together to make a nice, big, happy chord. I'm going to turn Smart Chords back on, and I'm going to jump to a note. I'm going to jump to note A, which, if you don't know the names of these notes on the keyboard, it's very easy as long as you know the alphabet. We can start on C. C is the note next to 2 black keys, whereas F is the key next to 3 black keys. But if you start on C, you can just go up the alphabet. C, D, E, F, G, and the musical alphabet ends there at G and then restarts at A. A, B, C. And what do you know? We're back on C next to 2 black keys, just like this C next to 2 black keys. It's just a repeated pattern. You might be asking, well, what are the black notes named? And we'll get to that later. Don't worry. Just know that we've got the full alphabet represented here, A through G, just in a really specific order here. Usually a lot of keyboards start on C. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then restarting A, B, C. So, like I said, let's jump to an A key. we get this kind of chord here. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off Smart Chords again so I can play you the full chord on the keyboard here. A, C, E. This chord's got a bit of a darker sound to it than our C major. Let me jump back down to C major. That sounds very final and very happy. If I play it up an octave, same collection of notes, just higher on the keyboard, C, E, G, that's very happy. But we're talking about A here, A, C, E. It's a minor chord. It sounds darker. It sounds maybe slightly sad. It's a minor chord. And those are the two kinds of chords that we're going to be dealing with here today. Major, the more happy sounding chords, and minor, the more sad or darker sounding chords. So when I turn Smart Chords back on, all you need to know is that BandLab knows what key we're in, so it knows what notes it's allowed to use, and it knows how to make chords within that key. So every key that we press, going up the keyboard, each one of those chords has a place in our song. So this is a really easy way to start making chord progressions. But let's start off simple. If you watched the previous tutorial on making drums, you're already familiar with ways that we can start making ideas in loops in BandLab, but I'll quickly review that. We've got these red brackets that I've activated by clicking, and that's going to allow us to loop a specific region here on our timeline instead of just infinitely recording. I'm also going to turn on our metronome, which is going to give us a sense of pulse for our song, and I'm going to pay attention to the beats per minute. Right now we're at 120 BPM, and I'm going to make sure we're back at bar 1, beat 1, and press play. And now I can hear the metronome. So now that we've got this bright red bracketed section highlighted, we're going to just try to make a simple 4-bar loop using only 2 chords. I'm going to start with the chord C major. And then I'm going to pick pretty much any other chord that I want across the keyboard. Why not F? We're going to hold both of those chords each for 8 beats. So let's record this idea really quick. I'm going to do the metronome drop down, make sure we have a count-in of 1 bar, a little extra time before we start recording. Then I'm going to press record, wait 4 beats, and start recording. 8 beats for each note. Follow along. 1, 2, ready, go. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now that's going to loop, so I don't need to do any more recording. I'm going to hit stop. And we have a very basic chord progression, our very first chord progression. I'm going to double click into that so we can see the MIDI and we can see the notes, but you already pretty much know the notes. They are notes that belong in C major and they are triads, right? So there's 3 different notes with an octave on top. C, E, G with another C on top. Our next chord, F, A, C with another F on top. Very basic chord progression. A 4-bar loop, but congratulations, you just made your first chord progression. Chord progressions tend to change depending on what section of the song you're in. If you listen to any of the songs that you love, from section to section, the chord progression is likely changing over time. So let's take this loop we just made and let's move it over. Let's forget about it for now because we're writing a song, right? So we want to write a few different chord progressions that we can build on. This time, why don't we go ahead and just reverse the order of those chords? Make it even simpler, right? I'm going to click back on instrument so we're not in MIDI mode anymore. So my idea here is to play the F followed by the C. And let's take it up one more level. We're going to use the Smart Chord feature here to add a little more complexity to our chord. So I'm going to use this little XY grid area. And it's also going to change the spread, so how far the notes are spread apart from each other. Because again, we have a full keyboard or a full virtual keyboard at our hands where we can play as wide as we want. So let me just put that node right in the center and see how that changes things. Wow, there's new notes in there. And you might have even noticed the Smart Chords little module here is naming these chords for us. So the name for this chord is C major 9. Sounds jazzy, doesn't it? Don't worry about what it means, just know for now that it's a much more complex chord. Let's try that on F. Same thing, F major 9. We'll get into what that means later on in the video. But let's make something a little more complex. And again, I'm going to reverse the order. I'm going to play F and then C. Let's do our recording process again. Skip to the beginning, press record. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Holding each chord for 2 full bars, or 8 beats each. Now, by adding that complexity using smart chords, I think our chords already sound a lot more advanced. I mean, let's compare these two together, side by side. Let's play our basic chord progression that we started with. It doesn't sound terrible, it just kind of sounds basic. This, on the other hand, someone might think we know how to play piano. That's really good. So chord progressions, making chord progressions is about the order in which you play the different chords, and it's also about the complexity of those chords too. We're keeping things basic here by only playing 2 chords at a time, but no doubt we could play 4 chords over this 4-bar loop. So why don't we instead play 1 chord per bar? And let's rehearse a little bit here. I could start on this time F to G to A to C to D. Let's make something up. Now, even though all of these notes that are currently being heard by our ears are notes that work in the key of C major, that doesn't mean that every chord progression is going to sound good. Let me hit record and just do a test. Every chord for 4 beats. Yeah, it didn't sound terrible. And let's talk about why. I wouldn't say it's a Grammy Award-winning chord progression either, but it didn't sound terrible. And to do that, let me simplify these chords. So again, going back to the 3-note, turn off my smart chords for a minute for the purposes of demoing for you all. We played F to G to A to E. And of course, smart chords made those chords a lot more advanced and cool sounding. But at the basic level, that's what we played. Why did that work? Well, we're playing chords that are all right next to each other. So that's one factor. They're all neighbors. So going from F to G doesn't sound that crazy. To A, which is our minor in this key. And then jumping down to E, well, you might say, well, that's not a neighbor. What's making that work? Well, what's making that work is the loop back to F. We jump down to E minor, but this chord resolves up to F. And it makes sense contextually. Chord progressions are all about tension and resolving that tension. It always feels good to land on the C major in this key, because that's our home chord. The scale is named C major, so that's our home. But we can also get away with landing on the minor. That can be a home too, it's just a scarier, darker home, because it's the relative minor of this key. But again, I don't want you to get too bogged down if you're not ready for all of that theory stuff. What I want you to take away from this is that you can utilize the Smart Chords feature in BandLab to start making really good sounding chord progression loops. And what you should do is experiment with different loops, different notes, and see what you can get to work. Now, I would say that chord progression landed in a good place, but listen to those first 3 chords again. It's not really the most pleasing sounding thing. So experiment with the order of your different chords. Experiment with the length of your chords, whether it's 2 full bars or a chord per bar. And hey, nobody said you even needed to stick to those rules. You can actually just play a different rhythm entirely. There, I didn't stick to the strict 1 bar or 2 bars rule at all. I played some short and some long notes there. So you can play with the rhythm. But the amazing thing out there is all of your favorite songs feature chord progressions, and chord progressions cannot be copywritten. So you can go search for your favorite song on the internet right now and then type chord progression after. And look at what the chord progression is for your song, and then go ahead and recreate that chord progression and recreate a whole new song based around that chord progression. Or at the very least, study your favorite songs and learn what chord progressions they use, and you're gonna start to see some fundamental similarities across lots of different music. Before we bounce off of BandLab Web, I want you to take a look at a quick few other things you can do in order to edit these chord progressions if you need to. First of all, of course, you can go ahead and delete individual notes by highlighting them and just pressing delete. Don't forget, you can always undo things with Control or Command Z. In addition to having the Smart Chords feature, we also get a Smart View feature, which will change this MIDI piano roll here to only showing notes that are in our key. So that's helpful for you too. Just make sure that this scale and root note you've selected here matches what you're using for your Smart Chords feature. And it wouldn't hurt to go ahead to your key functionality here for your whole project and let BandLab know, hey, this whole song is going to be in C major, or whatever key you pick. If your timing was a little bit off when you recorded your chord progression, no worries. You can select all the notes. And if you don't want to hear those notes as you select them, you can go ahead and turn off note preview. But you can go ahead and move these different notes around. Right now, I'm locking to that grid because I've got the magnet tool turned on. If I turn that magnet tool off, I can slide these notes anywhere. But if you want to keep things nice and aligned to the grid, keep the magnet tool on. And just like with drums, you can select all of your notes and quantize them. If, for instance, you wanted your chords to be a higher octave, you could go ahead and press the +12 button, and now we'd have much higher notes. Let's listen to those. I think I'll keep them back down an octave, so I'll click -12. Of course, you may have hit one key too hard. You can go ahead and check velocity mode, and you can see exactly how hard you hit each note, the level of velocity per each note. In case one chord came out, or one note in particular, came out a bit too loud, you can click on those notes and adjust them. And of course, you can select multiple notes and adjust multiple notes at a single time. One last smart chord feature I want to put you on to is that there's a strum feature. Right now, when we press a single key, we just get all the notes happening all at once. Well, with the strum feature, we can dial that up, and it will, instead of playing them all at once, it'll strum through the notes. And when we push the strum feature to the right, it's going to strum those notes from the bottom up, or from left to right on the piano. You can see how they enter in on the screen. So now we should understand that going to the left here, those notes are actually strumming down, or from right to left. My approach from there, if I were writing a song starting with chord progressions, or if I was adding on to a beat, I would write a few chord progressions, capture them as loops, nice and even loops, 4, 8, or 16 bars, and then find different sections of the song to put them in, creating a different chord progression for my verse, chorus, pre-chorus, or any other section you have for your song. So that's the easy way with the scale function. But now let's transition to talking a little bit more about these music theory ideas that are going to help you be able to do this on your own without smart chords. All right, so we're back on the mobile app now, and I've just loaded up a blank project with a virtual instrument, same piano sound we were using before. Now, I've been alluding to all these music theory topics in order to understand the chords, and the Smart Chords function is a way around that, but learning some basic theory fundamentals is going to help you greatly if you're looking to make your own music, and really it's not that scary. It is a little bit technical, so don't be worried if you don't get it right away, but I'm going to do my best to explain a few of the basics here. I also have a full tutorial series on my channel strictly about music theory for producers. Okay, but here we are in BandLab with the piano instrument loaded up. This pattern of notes that I'm playing here might sound familiar, right? Like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And earlier I was referring to that as the C major scale. But that general sound, that collection of notes played in that order, it does represent a major scale. However, it's not the only major scale that exists. Here's another major scale. Doesn't that have the same tonality? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But I started on a totally different note. I started on G. And if you notice, there was also a black key in there. The reason those two collections of notes kind of sound the same, but are not the same, is because they're playing actually the same exact pattern, just from different starting places. And what do I even mean by pattern? Take a look at each individual note. We're going to count each individual note as one. That includes the black notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're going to call these half steps. So from C to C sharp, which we'll call this black note, that's a half step. From C sharp to D, that's a half step. But don't be confused. That doesn't just mean black note to white note. From E to F is a half step. There's no note in between. That's a half step. So you can imagine if two notes right next to each other are a half step, if we go one more, two notes that are two half steps apart, two halves make a whole. That's a whole step apart. C to D. From C, we count 1, 2. That's two half steps. So from C to D is a whole step relationship. From E to F sharp is also a whole step relationship. Remember, count from where you're starting from. From E to F is a half step. From F to F sharp is another half step. Two halves make a whole. Why am I explaining to you all this vocabulary? Well, because to get to the answer of what makes a major scale work, no matter where you start from, is that relationship and that pattern of those 7 notes and how they're connected to each other via whole steps and half steps. So let's examine it. If we know that a C major scale is white keys only, starting from C, we can now identify the relationship between each and every one of those notes. C to D, that's a whole step, right? 1, 2, that's a whole step. Next note in C major is E. That's another whole step. E to F, we already talked about. That's a half step. There's no note in between. They're right next to each other. They're neighbors. Now remember, C major scale, all white keys. So how do we get from F to G? 1, 2. That's a whole step. And so on. G to A, 1, 2, another whole step. 1, 2 to B, that's another whole step. And finally here, our last little interval here, B to C, that's a half step. So this pattern here, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, is a major scale. That means we can start on any note and play a major scale, even F sharp, which all of you out there might be trying to avoid because it's a black key and the black keys are scary. No, they're not scary. All these keys are the same thing. So whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Let's do it from F sharp, a major scale. Whole step, 1, 2. Whole step, 1, 2. Half step. Now another whole step. Another whole step. Another whole step, and we've got that half step relationship in the end. Put it all together. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Same thing as starting from C and playing all the white keys from C. So if you unlock that little secret formula, you should not be afraid of the piano and of scales. Why is this important to you and your chords that you're trying to make? Well, because the scale that you're in, the key that you're playing in, I'm kind of using those terms interchangeably, dictates the notes that you're allowed to use. Do these rules get broken in a lot of music? Yes, but let's keep it simple for now if you're just starting out. So, if you remember, we mentioned that chords contain 3 notes. We can notice that if we play the first chord in C major, the C major chord, And what makes that a C major chord? It goes back to the distance between these notes. C, E, and G are the 3 notes in the C major chord. Let's count how far away they are from each other. C to E, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 half steps. Call that a major third. Let's count now from C to G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 half steps. Call that a perfect fifth. So in addition to us being able to measure the distance between notes in half steps and whole steps, 2 notes together, that's called an interval, and each of these intervals has its own name. So at a basic level, C to G is a perfect fifth. C to E is a major third. But remember those numbers, 4 half steps to get to our major third, and then 7 half steps to get to our perfect fifth. Even that we can recreate. So let's go back to the dreaded F sharp and let's measure those out again. From F sharp, let's count 4 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got A sharp. It's a major third. So remember, now we need to go 7 half steps to get to the perfect fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Combine those 3 notes. And what do you know? We get an F sharp major chord. These are just replicable formulas. So if you understand what key you're in and you know what notes you're allowed to use, you can build these chords. There's one more type of chord I want to tell you about, which is a minor chord. And you might say, well, Tetro, if we're in, say, C major, why would I want to play a minor chord? Just because we're in a major key doesn't mean there are no minor chords. Because remember, we have a locked set of notes that we're allowed to play based on our secret whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half formula. So, if we start on A, let's make a chord using only the notes in C major. Forming these triads by just playing evenly spaced notes, but already you can tell this chord sounds different, and let's measure it to see if it's true. Does it sound different? What's the relationship between A and C? Let's count. 1, 2, 3. 3 half steps. And if you remember from our major chord, the relationship between the root note and the next note, the third, was 4. That's because the relationship of 3 half steps makes a minor third, which is going to completely change our chord to be a minor chord instead of a major chord. Let's count up to the fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 half steps. Don't forget. That's a chord. So the fifth relationship stays the same. It's that third, it's the third, the middle note that changes whether a chord is minor or major. So with that being said, you might be saying, well, Tetro, doesn't that mean if you just lift up that middle note 1 half step, you'll get a major chord? And if you thought that, your answer is correct. This is an A major chord. And if you were going to play in the key of A major or a key that contained A major, you could use that chord. But if we're in C major, that note, that C sharp, does not exist fundamentally in that key. So that's why we have A minor. That was a lot to conceptualize, but it is sort of the underlying code of music, the foundational element of how all of these notes come together to make different sounds. But I have one level deeper for you. If you noticed when we used Smart Chords, one of the chords referenced talked about F major 9. What does that number 9 mean? And many of you might have even heard of a 7th chord. What does that mean? This is actually very simple too. Remember our C major chord, C, E, G. That's the 1, the first note in the chord, the 1. The 3, the third, and the 5, the fifth. 1, 3, and 5. It's the most basic chord you can have. Any chord has that. If I go back to our A minor, that's the root of the chord, A, the third of the chord, C, the fifth of the chord, E. They make up a chord, 1, 3, 5. Now I'm just talking about these chords in isolation, the root, the third, and the fifth. Well, if there's a root, the 1, the third, 3, and the fifth, 5, we also have other numbers going up that we can stack on top of this chord. So C, E, G, let's keep evenly spaced notes and stack B on top. If we already had 1, 3, 5, what is the next note? It's 7. And guess what? If we keep things evenly spaced and we add another note on top, C, E, G, B, D, we have a 9. And if you wanted to get really crazy and add an F on top of that, we'd have an 11. So when you see those fancy numbers next to a chord, C major 7, just know that that's all those numbers are referring to, an additional scale degree on top of a basic chord. Because if I just told you play a C, you might just play a normal C chord with only the notes that you need to play a C chord. If I said, hey, play a C7, you know to throw that extra note on top. Or not even necessarily on top, because you can play these chords in different orders. So if you look at the screen, you see the notes C, G, B, and E. And all that is putting the E on top rather than putting E in the middle there. It's just a chord inversion. So I think we'll end it there today because it's getting pretty complicated and I don't want to overwhelm you. But on the BandLab web interface, you have Smart Chords to get you started making your chord progressions in a really easy way. And hopefully this back half of this lesson gave you a little bit of the theory knowledge that you can take forward and now start writing and playing your own chord progressions. And you can sort of see the matrix behind how all this music and all these chords are working. A lot of these rules that I talked about today can definitely be broken and do often get broken in different types of music. But starting at a basic foundational level, you have what you need to know here in order to build some basic and not so basic chord progressions. Use your basic 3 notes, your 1, your 3, and your 5. If you want to get a little more complex, add a 7 or a 9 on top. And don't forget that the notes of the chord can be played in different orders too. But the more you break that root position order of a chord, the stranger it will sound. Maybe not even necessarily strange, but it might sound less like the chord you're going for. So just look out for that. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, give this video a like. Let us know what you thought in the comments down below. If you enjoyed my teaching style, I've got my own channel. My name is Tejo here for BandLab. That's going to be it for now. Have a good one.